Okay, I promise you tonight a promise in blood that we start at 6:30, which is now, and we finish at 8:30. This is something we're going to try in the city of Lebanon during the course of the couple next years to come here, about having conversations out in the community, and we'll look at different sites, and we'll choose topics, and we hope you maybe suggest topics for us that we should come out and engage in this conversation. It's very informal here tonight. It might get a little warm here tonight. Earlier I said there's water back there. There will be some food here, and it's a two-way thing. So I want you as comfortable as you possibly can be. There's some bathrooms back there. In terms of our situation here, there's exits on the left, exits on the right. Always is a good public safety kind of guy. Always know your exits are. They're there and there and there. Life jackets are in the they're under the seat, but also I think they're with a commitment to be civil. So if any of you feel like getting uncivil and bailing tonight, please don't. Introduction to this is we've had a lot of conversation about airports, and tonight's to have a conversation a little more. I suggested to the mayor and city council that we should give an opportunity to have this conversation, get people together, and talk about the airport. And my council members are here tonight. If you kindly raise your hand, and to begin the conversation, if you'd like to say anything, any of the council members would like to make mention. Say anything.
Thank you. I'm Karen Leo Hill, and I will say something briefly because I found out this afternoon it's the junior and senior high school chorus concert tonight. So my daughter is singing in about 25 minutes. But I wanted to come here tonight and be here just for a few minutes because I am a strong supporter of the airport. I believe very much in the future of the airport, but I do believe that we have a lot of work to do to make it something that is a benefit to the residents of Lebanon. So I remain very positively and constructively engaged in this issue, and I believe that there can be truly a solution that will benefit everyone. So I thank the manager's office for putting together this well-organized evening, and regret that I won't be able to stay for the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, the council member is here.
Nicole Corman, Councilor at Large. I live in Ward 3, and just echo what Councilor Phil said, and I'm glad we have such a great turnout.
There are more council members here?
Carol Justin, Ward 3. I'm quite committed to the airport, and at the same time very concerned about the costs of maintaining the airport, and looking forward to some solutions.
Erling Heisted, again, Ward 3. Councilor at Large, used to fly out of that airport, and I think it can be a big asset to the whole area. We need to find a way to support it.
Hi, I'm Scott Pauls. I'm a councillor from Ward 3. I'm also assistant mayor. And I won't echo too much of what everybody else has said. I'm pretty much on board with what everybody else has said, but just thank you all for coming. It's really great to see a lot of people here to come and talk about an issue that is really, I think, central to the city. And how we choose to deal with the airport over time is going to shape a lot of our policy and a lot of the development or non-development or whatever of the city as we go forward. So thank you all for coming.
And we have a couple of council members in the back.
First runner, Ward 2.
Councilmember Prentice.
Sue Prentice, Ward 1. Thank the manager's office for pulling this together, and appreciate what other councilors have said that the truth from this long.
Well, thank you. Now with that, we're going to go ahead and launch. I think I've given you the housekeeping with bathrooms are there, water and drinks are there, there'll be snacks there, exits on the right, exits on the left. Please feel free to have a snack or have a drink at any time. This is meant to be comfortable for you. Now there's plenty of chairs. We have a whole stack of chairs out there. And so we will bring chairs out as, you know, we didn't know the level, so maybe we'll bring some more chairs out here because we have some people standing. I don't want anybody to have to stand through this. I got the police chief here. He'll get those chairs for us. Now, tonight we're going to use a PowerPoint as way PowerPoints are supposed to be used, as a tool and not as the subject. The subject is you. The subject is the airport, how you feel about the airport. We're only going to use this as a tool. Looking at the introduction, let's go ahead, and Rick, our airport manager, is going to be my tag team buddy here, and he's going to operate the PowerPoint for us. Could we, now we're at the introduction, we finished housekeeping, could go to the objectives and vision. Take a look at this. This language in the PowerPoint right now is language that we had in the past, and it's found in a number of different documents with regard to the airport. So I wanted to present this to you to show how the airport has been described in the current literature that's in the city. But your conversation tonight and what might follow up there isn't bound by what's on this particular slide, but it illustrates the kind of thing the airport has stood for in terms of its objectives. Aviation services, obviously. There's concerns about the safety and efficiency. Being in an airport and being around aircraft, that's a very professional situation where there has to be a lot of professionalism. Finances is very important. We have a commitment in the city of Lebanon to everything we do is affordable to the residents. And we want to work toward affordability. We also have a commitment in Lebanon to be environmentally sound, and whatever we do be sustainable as a sustainable community. This airport has shown that it can contribute. It also shows there are challenges. You'll see this in your handout in the brochure that you could pick up. If you haven't got one, please get one. There's one available for you at the back table, which is a little packet of material we have for you.
We're running a little low because we really weren't expecting maybe this big of a turnout, which we're really happy happened. But if anybody didn't get one and wants one, it's going to be on the website and it's going to be available in the office.
So we'll have some more for you then on the website. This is so great that you're here. Rick, let's go to the next slide. Now, the vision thing, this is the current language, the current literature in the city about vision. Now, vision, of course, we all know, is a preferred future. I think everyone in this room probably is so aware of how changing our environment is right now. I mean, socially, politically, financially, there's technology. There's so many changes, the industry, all the factors that are going on. The vision here, it was that we were going to have a safe, well-maintained, and efficient operated airport where people of Lebanon and the Upper Valley desire to work, visit, conduct business, and travel. The vision went on to talk about balancing and talked about the airport being deserving of community pride and support. At the end of our session tonight, we're going to go back and visit this and listen to what the group feels with regard to some of the measures that are up there, and really just say what you think. Just what do you think? Let's go to the next one. There we go. You want to go ahead and click history? Now, I'm going to turn the mic to Rick so he can describe this. The old saying is, if you don't learn from history, it'll repeat itself. And so this is history. And we're not going to dwell on history, but we have to respect history. So I'd like to have Rick go through and cover the slide.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everybody, for being here. For the guys with the video cameras, if you see a glare, there's nothing I can do about that. Sorry. The airport, once we looked into it, has a really interesting history. I'll try to summarize what we found. This is the development of the airport. The blue is what started in, and I'll get into the history in a minute, in the 1940s. When it was first started, that's what it looked like, is the area in the blue. There it is. And then in the late 50s, bought some land off either end of what's our crosswind runway now, runway 725. And later on, bought some more land off either end. And then in the late 80s, we bought this piece down on the south end. So in the 40s, it was the blue, 50s, but over time, what's known as the airport boundary has actually changed due to ownership and processing. For instance, this is what the airport started out as, the quote airport boundary, and and what's now in the airport boundary, a better picture coming up, is basically the red down here, around here on the yellow, and around here. So let's get started with a little bit of history. 1941, some selectmen met and wanted to develop an airport. There was a warrant to purchase 750 acres on Slack Hill. Actually, 624 were purchased with a down payment of only $65 from a Mr. Eastman. And it was developed, and then the key thing, one of the key points, August 1941, is there was an agreement with the U.S. government that this city town at that time said, we dedicate, the word is dedicate this for public benefit as an airport, all of that land. 1944, it transferred to the city. A little bit later in the 40s, Northeast Airlines. 54, not that long ago, the 8,000 enplanements, and there are the fares at that time. Late 50s, there was talk about the interstate highway, Interstate 89 being developed, and as I mentioned before, we bought some land in the late 50s and 60s. 1960, there was a Lebanon Regional Airport Authority, and what they did is the city leased the inner, what is now known as the airport property, to the airport authority, and kept the outer, what amounts to 200 acres, as city property for industrial development. Later on, the regional authority said, why don't you deed us that inner portion, which they did, and FA said, fine to do that, but all of the airport property needs our approval if you were to snip any of it off. It's all airport property. Yeah, 78, the regional airport authorities dissolved, went back to the city. Skipping ahead, there was an environmental assessment for the runway extension and for Phase 1A, which is what you all know as our airport industrial park. And in late 80s, that industrial park was sold off with individual lots and built, and it's very successful. As far as finances go, in the early 90s, there was a code that says there's going to be an airport development and it's going to break even or operate in the black. Over the past couple of years, we've developed some conservation easements, and in 07 we completed our city T-hanger project. Then what came up in the late 2000s is we had a need for a runway safety area, and I'll explain that in a minute. So we've done a master plan. We're almost through an environmental assessment on that subject. Cape Air is here tonight. They started in November of 08. And in 08, the requirement for being self-sustaining was repealed. The reason was the airport was never operating in the black. In 2010, we did the mitigation for the airport hangar project of 108 acres. And in 2011, we surrendered our Part 139 operating certificate. Part 139 would be Logan, Manchester, and such.
We'll just give you a chance in terms of the conversation now. I'm going to have a mic on this side. There is a mic in the middle, and there's a mic on the end, and Andrew has a mic. Now, I know there must be some history buffs in here. And it was kind of dry looking at timelines. But would anyone like to if you're going to do some descriptions of the history of the airport, would anyone like to take a shot at what you've seen about the airport? And let's do 1940s and 1950s first. 1940s, 1950s. Anything here from anybody in the room that jumps out at you about that particular era, that you experienced, that you knew was experienced by your friends or your relatives, your families? Is there anything that people have kind of handed down as to what happened during that era?
I know the CPA.
Excuse me, Erling, would you just step to that mic there? We're going to share this with the public because we're recording it because we want the whole community to know they're here tonight, at least not in person, but they are here with us.
Erling Heisted, Ward 3. The airport had a CPA organization over there, and they were very welcoming to those of us in junior high and high school.
Microphone?
May have to lean down.
CAP, not CPA.
Very good.
Civilian Air Patrol.
Right. Is that on now? Is that on now?
Here, Erling, I'm going to come across here. This is the way it's going to be tonight. It's kind of Philadelphia.
This feels a lot better. 40s and 50s, CAP. We flew over there. There was a big group of junior high and high school kids. And Sandy Sanderson and quite a few others were building planes at home and bringing them over. And it was exciting. We were operating on the other side of the airport from where the terminal is presently. But it was a very active time, and I look forward to seeing a very active time over there again. Both sides, if not more on one.
Other thoughts, other experiences people had during that period of the 40s through the 50s? Okay, let's do the 60s and 70s. I like the 60s because I'm a 60s guy. So any remembrance from you in terms of either 50s, 60s, or 70s that kind of strike you about the airport? Yeah, let me come back there. Hey, he'll get you one.
Oh, I don't care. I would say the 60s we had great access. You had a airport authority. The region was supporting the airport, not just the city of Lebanon. And by the early 70s, you could leave here at 6 a.m. in the morning, and I could be at a meeting in Denver by 11. And to me, that was ideal. And the unfortunate thing is that under deregulation, we live at the end of the food chain. And the airport was viable, but I think the city of Lebanon stepped up, realized it had a major asset, and the other towns in the Upper Valley didn't want to support it anymore.
I appreciate that. And would you state your name? Because we want to try to make sure people get to know people that don't already.
I'd rather not, but okay. John Schiffman. I own some property just east of the square in Lebanon. I do not live in Lebanon.
John, I appreciate your comment. I'm Greg Lewis, city manager, and we're just trying to we're only trying to provide this as kind of conversation to folks, and we want to do it respectfully. Now let's go 60s, 70s, 80s. Comments about that period of time. There's one over here. Andrew's coming your way.
Antoinette Matlins from Woodstock, Vermont. In 1984, we were considering moving to this area from Midtown Manhattan. The only reason we chose this area was because of the airport in Lebanon. We started a business. We have 30 employees in that business. I fly for my own business to places all around the world. I do about 125 flight segments a year. But the thing about the 1980s and the Lebanon Airport was, as Mr. Schiffman said, we could be in New York literally in a few hours, door to door. We could get to any place in the continental United States or around the world in a not unreasonable amount of time. We could bring prospective employees quickly and easily to this area. We could run a business in a sane manner with all of the benefits and far fewer stresses of New York, etc. There were, at the time we moved here, you may remember Command Airlines and Precision Airlines. It instilled instant confidence in me. I don't know about the rest of you. Loved those planes. And then, of course, at one point there were 3 airlines simultaneously operating out of Lebanon. I think that was still in the 80s, maybe it was the 90s. I have no sense of time. It never entered our mind that there would ever come a time when the airport services in Lebanon no longer met our needs. And I hope that through the dialogue and the discussions and the interests, one woman said earlier that she hoped that we would be able to continue this airport because of the benefit it would bring to the area. I suggest you also consider the loss to the area were there not an airport. And it extends not just to Lebanon, but the broader area. And someone else said the other areas weren't willing to support it. Perhaps it's time to revisit that particular approach to keeping this airport viable.
Thank you very much. Now we're going to do the 90s in our last decade here. And if you got something that spurred some thought, please feel free. Don't my arbitrary mention of 90s and 2010. Go ahead.
Tim McNamara from Ward 1. The thing I noticed the most is I joined the Navy in the mid-'80s, Navy Reserve, and they used to fly us out of Lebanon constantly. I mean, whenever I would get orders, it would be from Lebanon to wherever in the world. And I noticed that changed around about 1990 or 91, where all of a sudden they were flying us out of Manchester. So something clearly happened with the government and their sort of travel arrangements that they made to shift over to Manchester at that time. But I think that the best flights that were ever out of Lebanon, for me, as far as versatility, was a direct flight to Philadelphia. Because when you could go to Philadelphia, you could literally go anywhere quickly, and you actually felt like you were flying somewhere. From Lebanon to Philadelphia was a reasonable flight, and it actually seemed. Actually, they never flew me through. Flew me through Boston or New York. It was always through Philadelphia. So I think that if I was any representation during that period of time, and I think there's a lot of reservists and National Guard people, within a 50 or 75 mile radius of here, a lot of us were flying out of Lebanon that time because that's where our orders came from, and that changed very, very abruptly.
It's really interesting, you see that kind of feel, people have feelings about the airport, and there's some different feelings there. And that's really important about a sense of place in a community, is to have feelings about things and try to resolve those because we have to do all this balancing. Now, this next slide, we'll just briefly, you can look at that yourself. It shows you the eras and it portrays them on the slide. And so you can go back and look at those, and we'll have them online so they'll be very visible for you. Let's go to the next one, Rick. Now we're going to talk about the airport activity levels, which people have mentioned a little bit already. And Rick, why don't I'll give you the mic to make some comments and just kind of go through the slides pretty fast.
This slide here is the total aircraft operations, which would be a landing and takeoff by helicopter, airplane, jet, single engine, any aircraft at all. A landing is one operation, takeoff is another one. And this is a result pretty much of the economic recession in 07. 60,000 dropped down substantially after the economic recession. This one shows the enplanements, and somebody was speaking about Philadelphia and such. Back in the late 90s, 3 airplanes, 3 destinations, 3 airlines. As Manchester Airport, which is our main competitor, improved, we used to have more enplanements in Manchester. As Manchester improved, Lebanon decreased, and it was basically a competition thing. Recently, we've hovered around the 10,000 range, but what I'd like to point out here is this. It's a busy slide. Here is 2008, and this was Colgan Airways. Cape Air joined us in November of 2008. New service, new airplane, new destination. 08, 9, 10, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So what's very obvious is we're progressively increasing our employments, progressively getting better. Are we going to have the 40,000 that we used to have? Most likely not, due to the competition. But we are improving.
This is a good time for some conversation about the activity level from the perspectives of those that are here tonight. What would you like to say to the rest of us and to the community about the activity levels that you just saw some of those? What would you like to share? What would you like to say? And what's your thoughts about this activity level? Go ahead, Michael, right there.
So I'm George Sykes, Ward 2. I spent the last 2 years away in a foreign country, and one of the things that I hope people take into consideration is that one of the possibilities for me was to fly back to Lebanon Airport as opposed to Boston. Manchester really wasn't, given from where I was coming from, wasn't a possibility. I hope everybody will take into consideration the idea that when you have an opportunity to be home at a reasonable hour, as opposed to being in Boston at a few hours earlier, and then take a 2.5 hour bus trip, and now you're getting home at midnight instead of 9 o'clock, and you've been away for 6 months. That's a really big deal. And so, for me, I never used the airport before, but in the last 2 years I've used it quite frequently, and there's that sense of when you get on that Cape Air flight, I feel like I'm home. I'm going to be home soon. And I think that intangible makes a big difference to people and make you feel better about a resource that we have.
Go that way. I'll just share my own coming here to be meeting the council for the first time and coming to Lebanon the first time. I came in from Buffalo to Boston and got on Cape Air. And so, and I love flying. I'm one of those guys that really love flying. And I swear that I was sold on the job before I got there. Because when I flew in at night on Cape Air and coming across the valley and seeing the sparkling lights and seeing all this wonderful terrain and all these, it just looked, I told my wife, the only thing I could think of, that looked like a very special place, kind of an extraordinary place. I mean, it was better than any card I could ever think of. So my lasting impression, my first impression, which was flying in here, and I hadn't anticipated Cape Air either. I fly a lot, but I hadn't anticipated Cape Air, and I was wondering where Cape Air was at when I was on the JetBlue concourse, and I found it, and I don't regret it. Other thoughts on this business of activity level? There we go. We got one right there for you.
Paul Boucher, I'm Ward 2, and I'm also the president and CEO of the Lebanon Area Chamber of Commerce. One of the most frequent asked questions at the office when people are thinking of relocating, and particularly with Dartmouth College or Mary Hitchcock, first of all is the school system, what your school system is like. And secondly, what do you have for transportation? What do you have for an airport? Can we easily fly in and out? So it's a big impact for the area financially and in growth. So just wanted you to consider that. Thanks.
Other comments related to what you saw, those arrows jumping around there and those dips and didos.
I'm Steve Flanders. I'm a foreigner. I come from Norwich, Vermont, but I'm also a former Airport Advisory Committee chair. And as far as activity is concerned, we've been talking along the lines of airline activity. And if you look at the airport today or look at it 10 years ago, much of that activity came on the general aviation side of the field, signal aviation. You see biz jets parked there and rather very expensive airplanes to fly in and out of here. And those people didn't come here on a whim. They came here for a purpose. And I think that purpose is something that is worthy of exploration to understand where in our region those people were coming for and what they were coming for. And it's benefit to us that's off the books, but they wouldn't spend that much money getting here if it weren't an important thing to do. And so I think that's something we need to come to appreciate.
So we have to look at all the types of uses out there and the possibilities for uses and things that have not yet been done, but maybe are outcomes that you might think as a community would be outcomes that our community should produce. And I think, so we're looking at the present, but we don't need to be tied to the present. We can think out of the box. Is there possibilities? We are going to do our risk analysis, the cost-benefit risk. We are all going to do that. We're going to do it affordable. We're going to have a business plan. But it is a good time for a community to think out of the box. I mean, my goodness, we're going into another century. This is a difficult time of life in the history of all of us. But it is a great opportunity. There's always the upside and there's always the downside. Other thoughts about the activity levels, what you saw, where we're at today? Yes, go on.
From somewhere, thank you. My name is Ro Wyman, and I've been living here in the Upper Valley since 1988, and I wanted to echo some of Antoinette Matlin's comments. One of the reasons we're up here is we fly our own airplane, and we are partial owners and bought the AMCA hangar with several other individuals in '91. And we selected this area because we drew a 20-mile radius circle around airports that had instrument approaches when we were thinking about relocating and finding a place to retire to. And so Lebanon became that place. And we fly in and out. My husband flies in and out almost every week. There are some limitations at certain times with weather, getting in and out in the morning fog in the fall and in the spring. Excellent instrument approaches, excellent tower. But we have seen and are disappointed in the declining interest, if you will, and the activity around the airport. I can remember the air show that was here, and of course it was a tragic one, but that drew so many people, and the Civil Air Patrol, and every year we do this flight with the children, taking them up and giving them an experience with flying. So there are all sorts of opportunities, I think, for us in Lebanon to capitalize on the airport and help it expand and grow. And particularly when we see the development now taking place, Gateway 1, Gateway 2, I think there are a lot of people fleeing the cities, businesses, and because of technology, people are now able to work at home and away from the big city. And this is an ideal place. And of course, New Hampshire has great ratings in terms of places to live and quality of life here in Lebanon and Hanover. So there are all sorts of positive things. And I think the city needs to find a way to reach out to the adjoining communities, as someone else suggested, and try to find a way to support expanding activities at the airport that would allow larger commercial planes to come in and service more of the areas. I remember Philadelphia, New York, Boston, and flying in and out all the time, and it certainly is convenient. And it's convenient to bring family up that way too. So we need to find a way to expand the service at the airport. These numbers are a little bit discouraging, but I think we need to find a committee and some people who will really take an interest in building it.
Appreciate the comment. Now we have one more comment there. Previously made a comment. Is there anyone here that has not yet made a comment? And then I'm going back over the other side. Yes, sir. Okay, you go.
David McLaughlin. I live on Hall Road, which is near the South Runway. And while the commuter airplanes are fine, they land and take off, it's the private airplanes that want to practice go around in circles all day long that we complain about constantly. We call up 298-5901 and ask the airport people to make the planes go somewhere else, because we don't want to listen to them all day long. And that's about it. I'm the only one that doesn't like the noise, I guess.
Well, I don't. There's a lot of people who don't like the noise in airports, so I've run across that many times. Now we have one over there, and let's go to the other side, and then we have come back there. Thank you for participating. It's important, in terms of our process in this community that we do these kinds of interactions. We've got to be more together on some of our conversations.
Hi, thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Sarah Reeves, and I'm from the Upper Valley. I'm from that foreign country of Norwich as well. And it's clear from listening to many of the people who've spoken that the airport is plays a significant role for some. And on the other hand, that some people have left cities where the skies are more polluted and there is more noise and there is more carbon emissions in the air. And so I hope if there has to be an airport that it can stay small and we seek other ways to provide opportunities for transport that aren't as environmentally negative.
A good point brought up. One of the values that the council and the city is pursuing is intermodal transportation. You know, I think diversity, you know, in a community adds such value to the community. So the diversity, everything could fit and be connected. Trying to have arrows all become aligned so the various modes of transportation are aligned and aren't fighting against each other, and there's opportunity in these various modes. You know, a well-balanced community could have a whole lot of different options for their transportation system. It's very clear around here. There's a lot of options for transportation in our community, but it's also clear from a guy with the fresh eyes that's watched a lot of jurisdictions is that we need to get our arrows aligned, because the arrows are going in a lot of different directions, and we ought to have a community that would be very able to move around all on different modes and do it in a very organized way that's efficient. So that's part of our conversation here. Now we have another hand up there, a person who hasn't asked or made a statement.
Hi, my name is Andrew Fonts. I'm from Ward 1. We've heard a lot of things about the airport tonight. Extolling its virtues, speaking about it being a cause that attracts people to want to live in this area. The other side of that coin is that I'm hearing from some of my fellow Lebanon resident taxpayers that Lebanon is becoming too expensive a place to live in. That Lebanon is bearing the disproportionate cost for a lot of the infrastructure that people of the region have come to rely upon and to benefit from. And I think what we need to factor in the equation as to what will happen with the airport is a cost sharing, a load sharing on that resource. And because it exists in Lebanon, that its further development meet not only the regional requirements or desires, but in a manner that that puts Lebanon residents properly into that equation, that puts the Lebanon taxpayer properly into that equation and the quality of life of the Lebanon residents.
That fits very nicely in this idea of being aligned. Because a community that's out of line on affordability or on imposition of burden is not going to be a community that's going to find itself as being successful as a community that is in line with its burden and is in line with its resources. But that doesn't mean we can't do things. It only means we have to be a very clear work plan, business plan for the city when we tackle things. Now we're going into meat and potatoes now, and I think there's some good inspiration mentioned here that in our room. Now we're going to kind of go to the brass tacks, and sometimes this looks like making sausage, but we're going to go where we are today and exactly what we're doing today. So Rick, why don't you begin with our operational.
We have some guests that are going to speak now. Basically, the airport gets direction from many people. Obviously, the citizens, the city council, but a lot of other people that guide us, direct us on how the airport is operated and grows. And we have Lisa Lesmerance from the FAA, Carol Nuola from New Hampshire DOT, Jed Merrow is from McFarland Johnson, one of our environmental consultants. They'll come up and speak briefly, and then I'll sum up at the end.
And we appreciate them being here today, and we know it's tough to cover all that they're covering, but we wanted to give you a taste of this today. So go ahead, Lisa.
Good evening. I'm Lisa Lesperance with the FAA. I just wanted to touch on things very briefly. There's a lot to cover here and just have a few minutes. First of all, I believe everyone in the room understands that FAA's mission is to make sure that public travel by air is safe, and that doesn't just limit itself to airlines and pilot training and air traffic control FAA employees, but also to an airport's infrastructure itself. So under Title 49 of the United States Code, Congress has given us the ability to provide federal funding for airport development. Currently, we are paying 90 cents on every dollar to help make the airport safe, but with that comes you have to follow our rules and regulations. And we have, I'm a little out of order here, but design standards and federal regulation part 77, these are all identifying areas that surround a runway, whether it's on the ground or in the air, that we want to maintain safe and free of anything that could interfere with air travel. Things like trees. Rick touched on runway safety areas. I'm sure we'll get more into that. But those are basically turf areas off the end of the runway, so if an airplane can't stop on the pavement, that they have a rollout without hopefully saving lives and not destroying any aircraft. So once this airport takes federal funding, they build out to our safety standards. We have something that we call grant assurances. There are actually 37 assurances. I just wanted to touch on these ones real quick. Giving an airport money to develop the airside in a safe environment, we want them to be able to use their revenues to create opportunities for business and become self-sustaining, which I'm sure is what many people want the airport in Lebanon to be self-sustaining as well. So some of the things that allow the airport to remain self-sustaining are, we talk about revenue diversion, any business on the airport that pays or lease or makes money, those funds have to stay on the airport to help operate the airport. It has to be a safe operating environment, and we talked about this meeting design standards, meeting the regulations under Part 77. In wintertime, you need to remove snows from the runway. We actually participate in buying snow removal equipment for that purpose for the airport. Non-discrimination talks about tenants on the airport and businesses, if you will, on the airport. Everyone needs to be treated fairly. You can't charge your brother-in-law, $10 a month and someone you don't like $100 a month. For all your rates and charges have to be equal. You can't discriminate on who can use the airport because it is a public airport. And the last one is maintaining rights and powers is the biggest thing. All these assurances lead up to the airport being able to keep its power to adhere to FAA standards and to keep the airport operating safely and maintain it in accordance with FAA safety standards.
Now, we hear, I know there's been conversation in the community about FAA, and we have Lisa here. We don't, this is the communication that's going on. We're communicating. She's been very helpful to us. These are the kind of relationships we want to build. From the audience, from our conversations, was there something that you would like to bring up about the FAA vis-a-vis the airport? Any subject you'd like to bring out? We have a person right on the right there.
Dominic Molester of Ward 3. I just would like to ask the question, how much does Lebanon really owe the federal government, if anything, for the financial support they've received, generous support over the years through the FAA, and what would be the mechanism or the requirement, if there is any, to repay the monies?
That's a very difficult question to answer directly. As one of these, we talked about the assurances earlier. In legislation, too, it talks about that the airport will remain an airport because it is a publicly owned, public use airport. They accept federal funding. If there was something that happened and the airport was going to be closed, so to speak. There are a couple of things. Legislatively, FAA actually has to agree to close the airport. Each airport in a region like New Hampshire or New England all serve a unique purpose. And to lose something in that system, FAA has to agree that we could lose the capabilities of that airport and there would be no detrimental result to our airspace, whether it's just locally or even nationally. Then to calculate how much the city would owe or the airport would owe if it were to be closed depends on how much money has been taken at that time. Basically, every time we issue federal funding, we look for what we call a 20-year life, that for at least 20 years, the airport would remain as an airport. If it closed after year 10, so to speak, years 11 and 20 is kind of owed back to the federal government. So there's a kind of proration, a calculation, depreciation. It's just not really an easy question. You would,
If it's maintained as an airport.
If it maintained as an airport, there would never be anything owed. I mean, that money is to help the airport stay as an airport. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Lisa. We're going to have our next speaker up here from the New Hampshire Department and Aeronautics, and would like to have you introduce yourself and maybe make a comment about the role.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Carol Nuola. I'm the Senior Aviation Planner at New Hampshire DOT Bureau of Aeronautics. We are the state arm of airport improvements for the sake of our discussion tonight. We, like FAA, we have a system of airports here in the state that are open to the public. Lebanon plays a crucial role in the Upper Valley. We don't have another airport with these kind of facilities, this amount of infrastructure that's available to the general public. And that's not just New Hampshire, but also across the border into the other country. It's a regional asset, just like a highway or the bridge going over the Connecticut River. The airport is a true asset and a true piece of infrastructure that's worth investing in. And as Rick has probably told you before about all the investments that has been made in the airport, going on since the 40s, we truly believe in the airport. Funding levels. We provide historically half of the non-federal match. Right now, FAA is paying 90%. We're currently paying 2.5%, but that's only by legislation. Our goal is in the next biennium to pay 5%. So therefore, at 95% on the dollar, or 95 cents on the dollar, that's a pretty good coupon for the investment that you're getting. Not many other infrastructure programs can match that. Here in this state, we have a couple of mechanisms to actually help the airports, and one of them happens to be the aircraft operating fees. Every aircraft that is registered here in New Hampshire pays two portions of fees. One is called an aircraft operating fee, and one is a state registration fee. The aircraft operating fee is based on the weight of the aircraft and the value of the aircraft when it was new, and it decreases over time, kind of like your car. A quarter of that fee goes back to the airport for use by the airport in operating and maintaining the airport as an airport. Therefore, the more aircraft you get, the more fees you get back. The newer the aircraft, the more fees you get back. The larger the aircraft, the more fees you get back. This all helps the airport in not having to ask for any subsidies. Whatever we can do to help, we try to wherever we can. Legislative support. The airport has gone through several iterations now of the Essential Air Service Program. We have been right alongside the city in helping that happen wherever we can help out. There was also an economic development grant through the Small Community Airport Development Service grant, where we were also helpful in supporting that as well. Airport registrations and inspections, that falls to the state. Airport registration, that is something where if you're registered as an airport with the state, there are certain protections in the state statutes to help you protect from liabilities or other issues that may come up like that. So it's important that the airport stay registered, and there's no fee. We also work with the airport on annual inspections. These are safety inspections. They help the airport identify issues that may need to be addressed in upcoming airport improvement programs, but it also collects information that the pilots are using or businesses might use who are looking to locate to the area as to what kind of facilities and what kind of infrastructure is available here at this airport. And last thing is zoning legislation. There's a state law that says that municipalities that have an airport within their boundaries shall have airport zoning, and the city of Lebanon has been good enough to implement that, and that's a good thing. We don't always get that. We do have the option to step in and impose it, but we don't like that, so you've been very proactive in protecting your airport with your own zoning. If there's any questions, I can take those too.
So as we did with the FAA, we have an opportunity with the state here. If there's something you would like to bring up with regards to the state and its role with regard to the airport, please do now. Is there any comment you would like to make or any? Do we have any? Okay. All right, we're going to go. Do we have anyone? Oh, here we go. We'll get you here.
Actually, Nicole Corman, Ward 3. I have a question for actually both of you. Relative to the cutting of trees around the airport, the question has been asked many times at Conservation Commission and council meetings. In an area as mountainous as northern New England, where obviously summits and hills interfere with airspace in all sorts of ways, how do you make decisions about tree cutting beyond what, I guess, to a layperson who's not a pilot, looks like, you know, your more obvious safety areas? More specifically, why would you want to clear a whole hillside? Thank you. When the summit is higher than the trees.
I'll start, and if Lisa'd like to add to it, I'll let her jump in too. You're correct. It seems very obvious to the layperson that immediately surrounding the runway pavement seems like an obvious place. Don't have trees there. That's where the aircraft are the lowest to the ground and probably the less maneuverable, and so therefore they're given the most safety. It's good not to have trees there, but it's also good not to have trees along the hillside near the runway pavement as well, because that's still considered part of the terminal airspace. Again, that's where the aircraft are relatively low to the ground. They don't have a lot of maneuvering options. What they're trying to do is get down to the ground on purpose on the safe runway. So the clearer and the safer we can make that in working with Rick and his staff, the better and safer it will be for all the pilots and the passengers on those planes.
I'm a very simple person. I'm not a pilot either. But if you could think of it from, I can really respect where you're coming from. The way I envision it, if your runway is kind of a football field, and then you imagine the stands, the way they come up, that is the airspace that we're trying to clear. So immediately you would think, yes, it's right here around the airport, but the further out you go, all the way up to your stadium seats, the nosebleed seats, the cheap seats, that's where we want to protect that whole environment. And just to throw in, I know they'll touch on this later, but we do coordinate with environmental agencies, federal and local environmental agencies, and there are a lot of negotiations and adjustments. You know, we want to save the environment as much as we want to save human lives.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. You have a comment? Yes. Oops, sorry.
Hi, David McLaughlin, Hall Road again. I think Nicole was trying to get to the point where Pike Industry wants to move their blinking light down from the top of their hill down to the next one. And the FAA suggests cutting 12 acres of trees for a 25-foot tall tower. And we don't seem to understand why you can't have a taller tower. Because 25-foot tower on top of that hill will be lower than my grandmother's property that's on Pike Hill there, Mount Finish.
Appreciate the comment. All these comments that are made, we are noting them too, because we want to explore them as they go. Rick, why don't you move to the next slide, please? Next we have Jed. Jed, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Jed Merrow. I'm with a consulting firm, McFarland Johnson. We're doing some environmental studies for the airport at the moment. I'm going to talk very briefly about some of the environmental regulations that the airport has to live with. This is kind of a long list, and I could talk all night about it, but the main point I want to get across is there's a fairly lengthy number of regulations. The resources that are considered most valuable, wetlands, waterways, water quality, so forth, rare species, are fairly well protected. We looked at it pretty closely. Wetlands and waterways are regulated by the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, DES, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers, requires a Section 404 permit. Stormwater runoff and water quality is regulated by both DES and the US EPA. DES requires stormwater management both during construction and long-term to ensure that there's no undue sedimentation, water quality, and so forth. And the EPA also has a construction runoff permit. And they also require of airports ongoing water quality monitoring to ensure that water quality standards are met in downstream water bodies. I also want to mention briefly that any federal action, which includes any federally funded project, is required to comply with the National Environmental Policy Act called NEPA. It's something that started way back in the Nixon administration a long time ago. It requires consideration of a project's impacts to a very broad range of resources. It's not a permitting program, it's not a mitigation program per se, but it does require that there be public documentation of the impacts to most resources, air quality, noise impacts, water quality, wetlands, waterways, historic resources, floodplains, rare species, and the list goes on. So there is fairly extensive requirements that those impacts be considered. And a little later in the program, I'm going to talk about what kind of resources are on and around the airfield, and also some of the resource impacts associated with the Runway Safety Area project, which we're currently working on.
I think what we'll do is we'll come back to Jed for those comments. Please remember them, because he's coming back here in a few minutes here and cover in depth the environment, which we'll devote some time and attention to. You can see what we got here. What do we have? We have a place. We have a place of Lebanon. It is a place of Lebanon. It's a place of transportation. It's a place of business. It's a place of regulatory activity for multiple layers of government. And it's also a place of natural resources. So you can see that situation. Also, my other comment on it to share is that, we're trying to we need to find a model that works for the community, that the community would feel that this is what we could live with as a model. And the model, when I came here and thinking about what a hub is a place that people come to, various folks, they come to, right, the hub, and we have this migration of people in. And people are using the airport that are not residents of Lebanon. But residents of Lebanon are part of the financial picture in terms of the local share. So this thing is pretty complicated. And I don't, we need to find the answer. Now, it's almost an hour in. Now, what I have a commitment is an hour. My mother used to say, if your son never sit for an hour, stand up and take a stretch break. How about a minute stretch break, 2 minute stretch break? Those who don't have chairs, who want chairs, we have plenty of chairs over there. You like a glass of water, there's water over there, some drinks over there. Please take a minute or two, and then we're going to come back and continue on the meat and potatoes here. Okay, if we could return to our seats, and we will finish off this section. We're still at meat and potatoes now, and we're going to have our airport manager introduce himself again for those who are there, and he's going to go through the meat and potatoes of running the airport. And we'll get to, Jed's going to come back and talk about environment a little more, and then we're going to talk about finances, and then we're going to end our last 30 minutes here is going to be about the future and what people in this room think of future possibilities might be for our airport. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Rick. Please, we have a sign-up list being passed around now. It was an omission we caught thanks to some good citizen here. So it's being passed around now.
Just to finish up on regulatory environment, Lisa mentioned and Carol mentioned the Airport Improvement Program. We get essential air service assistance with our airline. Any airport that's of our size or even bigger gets this essential air service subsidy to assist the airline to operate at the airport. We also have a Jewel, one of 4 airports in the state, with an air traffic control tower, a huge safety benefit. How does Lebanon sit in the airport system? Just follow the yellow. Those are other examples of other airports. We're a publicly owned airport. Obviously, we're a public use airport. The NPIAS means that we're on the FAA's plan to get federal funding. I just mentioned the control tower, one of 4 airports in the state with a control tower or a controlled field. Anybody, I believe it's within 5 miles of the airport, has to call into the tower before they enter our airspace if the airport tower is open. Huge safety benefit. We're a commercial service airport, meaning we have an airline. What kind of commercial service airport are we? We're not a large hub like Boston or a medium hub like Hartford or Bradley or a small hub like Manchester. We used to be a non-hub airport like Presque Isle or Bar Harbor. We're a non-primary. What we're trying to do is get up to 10,000 enplanements. We only have a little bit farther to go, and then we'll get back up to the non-hub airport. This is kind of how we live day to day. That's our organizational chart. It's a city-owned airport. The citizens of Lebanon own it. We work for them and the city council and the city manager. The red line is the airport department. We get guidance from everybody and anybody, principally the areas in the brown on the left. And our customers are the people on the left that we take guidance from, but also all of our lessees, most of which are here tonight, and people that do business at the airport. I'll run through this quickly. Some of it's already been mentioned in our vision. We want to have a safe airport. Everything's on balance. We want to maximize our revenue. We want to have two-way compatibility with the surrounding area. That means the surrounding area compatible with the airport. As important, it means the airport to be compatible with the surrounding area. We have to be fiscally responsible, and we have to be environmentally responsible. We have to follow aviation regulations. Part 139 is what we used to have. We surrendered that in February of 2011, but we're still following that. That's the best way to run an airport. Some of the work at the airport works a little bit differently. We're up on the hill. Practically nobody sees what we do or don't do. But maintenance is really important. It costs a lot of money. We do worldwide dissemination of anything that goes on at the airport. Once the snow comes to more than that much, everybody that flies in the world knows about it because we tell them. We remove snow, we work with the customers, the airlines, the tenants. What's very important is our maintenance people. If the runway closed down, our maintenance people are the only ones that can reopen it. I can't, I'm not properly trained. They can. Anytime there's an incident on the runway, deer on the runway, snow, whatever, our maintenance people take care of it. They talk to the control tower every day, all day, every day. They drive around the planes. It's just different. Anybody that's lived in Lebanon for a while, if you happen to drive up the hill and see it, this is our airport. There's Lebanon. You see the flashing lights like this as you're driving west from Lebanon. Those are on this end. 2 runways, 5,400, 5,500 feet, 5,200 feet. 89, Route 12A, Airport Road, Air Park Road. I'll just go through these quickly. It was mentioned about safety areas, and this one slide really shows it. What the design criteria is supposed to have based on the people that use the airport and the type of airport is 1,000 foot of smooth grass off this end, and this end. Towards Lebanon, north, and west. We don't have it, hence our environmental assessment that we're working on. The west side of the airport, private hangar, private hangar. These two hangars that were built, and it's an old picture, were built in '07. Looking to lease out this area for a corporate hangar. Good picture of the north end of the airport. Our control tower, Signal Aviation, provides the fuel and all of the aviation services, Sharkey's helicopters, individually owned hangars for planes. My favorite picture I'd like to show anybody that has ever traveled to an airport on an airline, you park here, you walk about 253 feet to the curb, you walk over here to the airline, you walk over here to security, and you walk out there to the plane. At the Cape Air plane, you never have more than 9 people in front of you in the security line. We're a full-service airport, everything from airlines, rent-a-cars, full-service airplane and airplane, helicopter work, newly start up a flight instruction and soon to be a charter operation at our airport. Again, a control tower, even a place that does aircraft manufacturing, major corporate flight department. We have airport security by Transportation Security Administration and the Lebanon Police Department. Connectivity that a couple people have mentioned, and as far as the old days when Colgan used to fly to LaGuardia, and I've heard it since I've been here for 3 years, oh, you don't fly to LaGuardia, I want to go to New York. Well, now you can. Here's how. With Cape Air, Lebanon has 2 destinations from Cape Air to Boston. I'll explain that in a minute. Flies a flight down to White Plains. Included in the fare is a limousine ride to Midtown Manhattan, not LaGuardia, Kennedy, or Newark, downtown Manhattan. You add this up, you go from here, Lebanon, to there, Midtown Manhattan, in 2.5 hours. Down in the morning, pretty productive day. Have supper about 7:45 at night up in the Upper Valley. Some of our service providers are here. I just shuffle paper all day. These are the people that actually provide the services that we've been talking about. And let's see, Greg Soho, if you can, is here. Signal Aviation, Sharkey's was a helicopter operation I mentioned. White Mountain Capital, Eric Dole and Jason are here. Leading Edge Aviation Northeast, Mark Nemeth is here. Big Green Aviation is doing some R&D on aircraft. Cape Air, our airline, Andrew Bonney and Jacqueline Donoho. I know I butchered that. 2 rent-a-cars, Avis, JD, and Kelly from, I guess they left, probably to go back to work. Avis and Hertz. The control tower, Brax. Thank you. Security. And we also have services to get people to and from the airport, limos, taxis, shuttles. A couple of important slides here. Now I mentioned about decreasing activity. Here's our Lebanon. Here are these commercial service airports in our area, the ones that have airline service. Rutland, Burlington, Manchester, Boston. Okay, well, what happens when you fly out of Lebanon? You fly out of Lebanon, this only covers to Boston, not New York. You fly out of Boston to Lebanon, a 55-minute trip to Boston. Well, what happens when you get there? You have you have over 72 nonstop destinations domestically, over 29 international nonstop destinations, which means 1 stop from Boston. You drive an hour and a half to the other airports, all really good airports, but when you get there, what do you get? Far fewer choices. It's a lot easier to get back at night from far away or international being gone for many months if you have these many choices. What does that look like? These are our non-stop, 1-stop destinations from Lebanon. 55 minutes to Boston, here's where you can go. Southeast, Northeast, Midwest, Southwest, coast to coast. Internationally, Caribbean, Mexico, Western Europe, Iceland. General aviation, anything that isn't an airline. A lot more airports, some with 2,000-foot runways, some with 11,300-foot runways. Here's what you can do from Lebanon. You can fly non-stop from Lebanon to at least these destinations domestically. West Coast, Seattle, Florida. Here's where you can fly internationally from Lebanon, non-stop. You can't do that in return because we don't have customs. You got to stop somewhere else. What that clearly shows is we have a huge amount of access to the airport all over the world. Now we have some other competition. We compete with anybody that wants to drive to another airport, limos and taxis that take people to other airports, buses, the Dartmouth coach, good service to Boston and other places, shuttles, and even the internet. That's becoming more and more popular. There, Jed? Oh, sorry.
We're going to do the environmental, but before we leave it, you know, I want to thank the stakeholders that are surround the airport for coming tonight. I mean, they've been kind of inspirational of getting involved with this and having an opportunity to come out here and participate. I think that the future of the airport, as you listen, as we have these conversations about it, I think it has to be a conversation about everybody. I mean, I don't think you know, all the eggs are in any one basket. I think it has to be about everybody that's involved around the airport, the footprint of the airport. It's a sense of place out there, and there's so many things going on in around that airport. And it's simply amazing that there's all these possibilities of people that are engaged in their profession and their businesses, and they're occupying this area. And it's really, they put their soul into the future for them and their businesses. And so therefore, this would be a very important piece in conversation, is to think broadly. So when we're thinking about outcomes that we should have from the airport, I think the community needs to think broadly about these outcomes. Now, environment is a really important piece because, you know, when I watch the slideshow, it's a bit amazing to see an airport up there in that positioning with all that beautiful surrounding and green. So Jed's going to we're doing this environmental assessment, and Jed's going to comment on it. There's more in the slide than Jed will be able to address. There's more coming on that issue, so there's more. This is kind of a taste of what that's all about. So I'm going to let Jed take it, and then we're going to go into what I think is the best part of this, is where we're going to go and what's the conversation, and we got everybody here, and let's talk about that. Jed?
Yeah. All right. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the environmental resources that are on and around the airport, and as well as talk about the safety area project we mentioned earlier. This shows you the airport is right about here. This particular figure shows you significant ecological areas that were identified in natural resources inventory, which the city commissioned just a few years ago. Significant ecological areas are areas that have unique resources or sensitive resources that are considered important for conservation. And you can see there's an area just south of the airport here. Go ahead, Rick. What goes into that determination? This is a wetland mapping. It's a broad brush town-wide or citywide wetland mapping that was done for the resource inventory. The colors indicate the value of the wetlands. Yellow is medium value wetlands along the airport here. Orange is high value wetlands, and there are some just south of the airport in here. And red is very high value wetlands. Go ahead, Rick. This is the resource co-occurrence map, which was used to develop these significant areas. The darker the color, essentially, the more resources and the more valuable resources that occur in those areas, the more important they are ecologically. And the ones that are outlined in purple are the significant ecological areas. And there are three just south of the airport. The upper one here is significant because it's shrub habitat, which is declining regionally. The species that use it are declining regionally. It's on airport property for the most part, and it's shrub habitat because the airport keeps the trees down as a safety measure. Next you have an area that's significant for a deer wintering area. That is mostly off of airport property. It's important deer habitat. Part of that would be impacted by the safety area project. And then a little further south, you have some important wetlands and the headwaters of Martin Brook, another significant area. Go ahead. conservation easement areas, there are 3 on airport property. Small one in this area along the crosswind runway, western portion of the airport property, and in the very southern portion, in an area that would be affected by the safety area project. No effects on the Farnham Hill Preserve to the east here. Go ahead. We delineated wetlands on most of airport property for the safety area project. You can see they're fairly extensive. The wetlands that are closest to the runways and the airfield are actually mowed turf grass areas. A little further out, you have some of the shrubby areas here, and then you go a little further out again, and you get into some forested wetlands there. Go ahead, Rick. And this shows you a picture of what some of those areas look like. Some of the shrubby areas with managed vegetation, mowed turf grass areas that are wet, and some of the nice forested wetlands around the airport. Go ahead. Some of the other resources around the airport, just to touch on a few things. There is some wildlife habitat. You get some turtles on some of the small ponds. There's bear use of surrounding habitats, as I'm sure many of you are aware. This is a vernal pool that's on the western portion of the property west of Runway 1836. It's a very productive vernal pool. Amphibians that use this area can only breed in areas like this. There are some rare plant species around the airport. This is called Fringed Gentian. Go ahead. The Fringed Gentian occurs in some of the mowed wet areas on the east side of the airport. It's a state-threatened plant species. It only occurs in a handful of places around the state. There's a state special concern species to the south in this area. Oh, it's over here. And the other species are not state listed, not federally listed, but they were identified in the natural resource inventory as rare plant species. Go ahead. And that gives you an idea of the resources that are on and around the airport. Talk about the safety area project briefly. 3 of the 4 runway safety areas, runway end safety areas at the airport do not meet FAA safety standards. FAA has required that they be made to meet standards, and we've been studying possible ways to do that. Problem is when we design this to meet all of the FAA standards, what we end up with is very substantial impacts to resources. Our first cut, we had 30 to 40 acres of wetland impact, very large amounts of earthwork, $30 to $40 million of cost, impacts that were really not reasonable, not permittable, and just frankly too expensive. Went back to the drawing board, looked at ways we could reduce the footprint, asked FAA for some relaxation of some of their standards, came up with some modified alternatives that still have some substantial impacts, but seem to be within the realm of reality anyways. This is a depiction of the north-south runway alternative. Up here is the south end. This is the shrubby area. I referred to the deer wintering areas a little further to the south. And then this is the north end where you have I-89 and Muskoma River. The runway would be shifted south 1,000 feet. The safety area south of the runway would be shifted south 1,000 feet. And there would be a substantial amount of earthwork and then some tree clearing beyond it as part of that alternative. Go ahead. The east-west runway is a lot easier. The north-south runway is lengthened and shifted so it can handle the larger planes. The east-west runway does not need to handle the full range of planes, and it can be shortened. Therefore, this is basically changing the pavement markings. It does not have any real impacts, the east-west runway, basically shortening the east-west runway to achieve standard safety areas. Go ahead. All right, so what do we end up for impacts? This is the north-south runway. The total wetland impacts we're talking about are still on the order of around 10 acres. Most of that is mowed turf grass areas, but they are still wetlands. They still have some wetland values. There would also be some tree clearing within and around some of the wetlands. Go ahead. And there would be a substantial amount of upland tree clearing, 30 to 40 acres, including some of it in deer wintering areas. And there would be some impacts to other upland habitats that would be basically converted from whatever they are now, forest or shrubland, to mowed turf grass areas primarily. Fairly substantial amount of earthwork, and then these are the cost range we're talking about. The upper one is the one that we're looking at is most likely to be the preferred alternative. Still fairly expensive, but we're getting into the realm of reality here. Go ahead. I just want to mention one thing. When we impact these resources, we don't just fill the wetlands in and walk away. You have to compensate for the impacts. The upper chart, I don't expect you to read all this. This is the Army Corps' mitigation ratios. The lower one is the DES's mitigation ratios. So if you fill in an acre of shrub wetland, you have to create or restore at least 2 acres of shrub wetland to compensate for those impacts. If you want to compensate for those impacts by preserving important habitat or important valuable conservation land, 15 to 1 or maybe a 10 to 1 ratio. So if you have 10 acres of wetland like we're talking about maybe 20 to 30 acres of new wetlands created or restored, or maybe 100 to 150 acres of wetland creation, of wetland preservation, excuse me. There is another way out. You can pay a fee to the DES. It's called the in lieu fee program. Money goes to an aquatic resource mitigation fund, and it goes to worthy projects that will compensate for those wetland impacts. For projects of this scale, if I remember right, the fee would be something like $1.5 million, and that was included in those cost numbers I showed you. So substantial mitigation is a substantial commitment for wetlands.
Now, when you see that piece and how complicated that situation is, and that'll have to be carefully, the analysis and the discussions and the comments and what will unfold. Again, now you see multiple layers of regulatory activity. You see the natural resources and the challenges of meeting our natural resource requirements. And you see the business plan about what's truly a business plan that might work out here. I would like to hear some comments. It's hard to swallow that much material, and I've been reading it for a while. It's been hard for me sitting behind the screen and reading this PowerPoint for substantial times. But some kind of reactions to it. Make long story short. That's what I always say. What for you? What would be the long story short if you had to look at what we just observed in terms of your environment and what we're having to deal with as a community?
It looks like a long pole for a short run. I'm sorry.
No,
Don Ballester again.
Got it?
Yeah, it looks like a long pole for a short run. You're doing a lot of reconfiguration at a very expensive price tag, and our emplanements are declining. And I saw the rationale for making that kind of an investment and reconfiguring 2 runways escapes me, plus the loss of the habitat or having to replace the habitat at some cost. Maybe I missed the whole point, but that's what I walk away with.
Thank you.
I'd just like to comment on that.
Yes.
Dave McLaughlin, Hall Road again.
Dave, why don't you stand up?
I haven't heard anything about noise and residents in the area being mentioned at all.
Okay. That's a good point. We're not going to forget that noisy planes. Other long story shorts from what we have here.
Andrew Fonts, Ward 1, just a clarification. Is the safety zone required for the size of plane that is currently being served out of the airport, or is this intended to increase the service that's available through the airport?
It's required for the size of planes that are currently using the airport. Yeah, it's not intended to change the operations in any way.
We're getting close to the time. Now, I want to do a little of the money talk that we can look at. So, Rick, can we hit the money slides? Maybe hit the heart of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Just hit the heart of it.
I wanted to go over the revenue and expenses on the airport. That's, since I've been here almost 3 years, it seems like that's something that comes up many, many times, is the balance of the airport, the revenue and expenses. So I wanted to go through what drives the revenue, what drives the expenses. First off, the expenses. Our going counterclockwise, our administration salaries, consultant fees that aren't paid for by FAA, supplies, insurance, special insurance that the airport carries. The biggest expense, as expected, is maintaining the field, and we already went through how important that is. Buying salt, buying sand, buying spark plugs, repairing our vehicles, and clearing the snow. And this number can go up or down based on the weather. We've been lucky this year. Debt service on our hangars, out of the airport's budget, we're paying off our debt service on our hangars.
This is city taxpayer money, yes?
Airport, our operating, it's part of what creates our expenses. Yes. And I'll get into the balance in a minute, but you're right. And this is when there's money left over, this goes towards paying some of our deficits that we've had in the past. The $43,000 is a payment that we make into the airport department pays to the city's general fund, which drives your taxes. This is a payment we pay to the general fund for administrative support. Now for our revenue.
Just so everyone understands, that $43,000 is going to reduce the tax burden.
Correct. For our revenue, the biggest chunk of our revenue is our airfield fees, our landing fees, and terminal rentals, from renting our terminal space to Cape Air, TSA, any of our lessees in the terminal. Hangar rentals, and we're doing a lot better this year than we've done. We've actually had quite a few people. Our hangars are now mostly rented rather than mostly empty. Airfield concessions. Anybody that, if I wanted to rent some space to store some stuff at the airport, I'd pay a lease rent. If I generated business because I was at the airport, I'd pay the lease rent and I'd pay a percent of gross. The percent of gross are these airfield concessions. Land rent, we rent land at the airport for hangars, for tie downs and such. That's the 46 number, excuse me. I'll skip up to this. We get a contribution from the general fund, or some call it a subsidy, of this that makes our revenue balance our expenses. Right now, today, we're in a deficit mode. Our expenses exceed our revenue, and this contribution from the general fund makes up the difference, so the revenue and the expenses balance. But here's the way that plays out. The top number is the revenue that generated by the airport is $750,000. If you added that 270 contribution, then they'd balance out. There's our expenses of $1,020,000. A couple of interesting things that go into the expenses. One is the $43,000, so picture this, the contribution from the general fund we receive. The $43,200 is a payment we make to the general fund in the opposite direction for administrative support, city hall expenses, and all of the administration for the city. It's kind of our share, I guess. We also included in our expenses is we pay a share of the computer support, $20,000 into the general fund. We also generate property tax revenue for the city two ways. We have city-owned property that generates lease revenue. We have city-owned buildings that generate lease revenue. We also have privately owned buildings on city property that generate revenue. So from our tax revenue generated at the airport, $87,300 go back into the general fund. So we received $750, we contributed $43 back, $20,000 back, and by us and all the lessees at the airport, we contribute another $87,000 back into the general fund. And at the bottom, there's also part of the taxes that goes to the city, state, and county schools. Still a deficit. We're trying to do better all the time, and the way that we do that is to rent out more property to be reasonable, no big investments that we can't see a return on.
So I think we kind of completed the 360 around the block on this, on what the long story short is about the airport. You know, and what we want to do in our last 30 minutes together is to talk about the possibilities of the airport. You can see, if you want to describe that airport, you can see that airport that has a lot of activity on it. And that you can see that airport has a lot of diversity about it. You can see that the airport has a lot of natural resource connection and impact with regards to it. You can see that the rules and regulations that govern the airport requires compliance issues that affect our financial bottom line, affect our natural resources. You can see that the size of that infrastructure could not be delivered by the city but for the federal government funding 90% of that infrastructure. But you can see the connectivity that with regards to federal funding, that federal funding comes with it guidelines and protections in the public interest from the perspective of the FAA. It also comes with state involvement because state helps pay half of the share that's paid from a local and state level toward the federal contribution, which has attachments to it. Long story short, you know, what should we be thinking about in terms of preferred future? I'm holding out to the entire county and have been bringing it to the attention through the policy work of the council about the city producing outcomes. And the outcomes that a city produces should be outcomes that the citizens wish the city to produce. So the city shouldn't be producing outcomes that are outcomes that the city residents do not get behind, do not favor, do not support. The adjective for any of those outcomes, if we say as a city and a community that we want these outcomes, they have to be affordable. So affordability is not an outcome. Affordability is really a standard. We're judging any outcomes that are created by the city as affordable to the residents of the city of Lebanon who pay the property taxes, and also affordable to those who pay the rates for the utilities. So that's what we're about, is the outcomes. You've heard them today, some of the outcomes that have followed the airport through its history to the present. And the question is these outcomes, the outcomes that we can get behind as a community in this decade and the decades to follow in this century. I mean, are these outcomes we wish as a community to follow? So at this point, I would ask the members of our group tonight for their suggestions. And this is the kind of thing that we're looking at. What's preferred? What's our preferred future here? What do you want from outcome from the airport? Deliver the same as presently delivered? Because since you saw the investments are going to be entailed, and that's not adding to the airport. That's just carrying on what the regulatory agencies say you must have for the present airport. The businesses that are in here in the community that are out there airport, the businesses that are connecting with the airport, what's your preference for outcomes? Those who use the air travel, those who use their own methodology for travel, for traveling by air, what's your outcomes? So that's kind of the opening for you. What are outcomes? What are things you should think we should get behind? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that...
Let's get a mic to you. We'll get a mic to you.
There's quite a few acres that are undeveloped in the industrial park, is there not?
Do we have a count on the acreage out that industrial?
It's significant, as I recall.
Do we have any? Yes, please.
Yes. Is there quite a few acres left to be developed in the industrial park, the south end?
On the existing industrial park?
No. Connected to, but not developed.
I think the part that was sold off for the industrial park is pretty much full. There are other areas around there that may or may not be developed, but as far as what the airport controlled or past tense controlled, that's about it. Might be 1 or 2 lots, but it's...
Well, I'm under the impression there's several acres, maybe 100 or more, that would be on the west side of the north-south runway, southbound, that was never developed.
We'll take that as a question, because we'll follow up then. On the questions that we bring up, we'll put them on the website. So
what I'd like to express
yes, please do that.
Is that the industrial park was developed by Marcel Taberge, who was the airport manager back late 70s into mid 80s. And the reason they selected him as the airport manager, because he was somewhere out west, and he had developed an industrial park adjacent to an airport that was similar to ours. And what he did, as I recall, he sold a lot of the lots off quickly at a low price with a build-out provision. And what that did was contribute to the tax base and to facilitate the airport, which made a lot of sense. Now, it was my understanding at the time that that wasn't completed, and there were additional land that could be developed, and if there is, that seems like an escape valve for your financial issue, because we've got to face the fact this is not going to be a jet port anytime soon. And so you have to look for alternative efforts to create income. That would be a suggestion, if that land is still available, to go ahead and develop it. Mm-hmm. Sell it if you have to at a cheap price with a build-out proviso. Get the tax money, dedicate that to the airport instead of throwing it back to the general fund, and then all the selectmen or the councilors down there don't have to run and hide when they think there's going to be a deficit, because that should cover it. And then as that progresses, you'll be able to improve the airport and maybe at some point bring in bigger airplanes.
That you've got that covered well in terms of your thought there about development of the airport. What was your name and place?
I'm Colonel Gray, retired FAA Chief Controller for the airport.
That's thank you.
Where do you live, sir?
Where do you live?
Where do you live? I live in Etna.
That's a great place.
I think every meal's a picnic and every day's a holiday. That's
great. It's good. That's pretty cool. Now, other questions. I want to keep going. We're going to get the dog wild. Here we go. I want to try to move as many as we can around, because we're not going to reach a conclusion on this, you understand. And if we do, that would be a miracle. But
okay. I just want to address the airport from the standpoint of someone who flies a lot and whose livelihood depends upon flying a lot. I couldn't help, I can't remember which one of you young women mentioned this, but the size of the aircraft affects the fees that are paid to the airport. And you mentioned something about the larger the plane, the greater the fees. The biggest deterrent to me, and I might add many other people who I used to meet all the time at the Lebanon Airport as we flew back and forth to New York or Philadelphia or wherever, is the size of the planes, because many of us need to take things onto the plane. If we're flying internationally, I know some of you guys seem to be able to do it with one small bag, but trust me, we women really can't. And so the weight and baggage limitations are a very real problem for many of us who travel extensively for work. I don't know, I love the Cape Air people. I think it's such a pleasure to fly in and out of Lebanon. I would love to be able to fly in and out of Lebanon far more often, like all the time, as I did for the first 25 years of my life up here. If you could just explore with Cape Air or others the possibilities of returning to a larger plane where you can bring some carry-on and expand the weight of the baggage that you can take with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I believe she did before. You just missed it. But
It's Antoinette Matlins from Woodstock, Vermont.
Okay. Other comments? Nicole?
So I need to disabuse some of the audience of a couple of misconceptions. This council has never hidden from a deficit. This council in 2008 passed the ordinance that required the airport to no longer be self-supporting, so that there would be no longer any mystery about who was paying for the airport. And who was paying for the airport that particular year to the tune of, if I'm not mistaken, others can help me who are here, over $900,000 deficit that year, courtesy of many people in Lebanon who never fly anywhere. Now that said, I'm a strong supporter of the airport. I want us to continue to have a viable airport. But the airport cannot be balanced for the region on the backs of Lebanon taxpayers, cannot grow to the extent that it destroys the quality of life for people who've been living next to the airport, some of them before there ever was an airport, such as Mr. Hall's grandmother. I think this is a wonderful event, and I think there are a lot of opportunities to make better use of the resources that are there. The land lease for Phase 1A of the airport, if the city had leased those instead of sold them for a nickel, we wouldn't be standing here. I think hopefully we're a lot smarter now and we'll be able to maximize our assets. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. We're back on outcomes. And I think if the community is going to move forward, we're going to have to decide what the outcomes are. And they could be the same things that we have today, or they could be something different. And I think that generally when local government units are working, we're always looking, at least from a city manager point of view, about trying to find those ways of producing outcomes for the community that the community is willing to have, and see if there has been something we should have thought of, could have thought of, we need to get it out. There's so much energy and so much, so much brain power in this area that I'm so impressed with the creativity of the area that we need to tap into that and build these partnerships between the private and the public and the nonprofit, and we need to find out what outcomes might be better for us. The gentleman right there.
I would like to hope that you could explore some sort of a bi-state minimal taxing district, similar, I don't want to put a pox on this, similar to the Norwich-Hanover Agreement, similar to Dresden, so that at least the entire upper Connecticut Valley, both on the east side and the west side of the river, that benefit from the airport, could start sharing some of this expense and acknowledge thanks to the City of Lebanon for past services, but let's get on with a more comprehensive funding program. Oh, I'm sorry. My friend, Councilor Wood, wants me to identify myself. John Schiffman, I live in Hanover, but I own property in Lebanon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shipman. All right, other thoughts? Is there an outcome we're missing? Yes, sir. And maybe make sure we get the name and place right. So
Nick Collins. I live in West Lebanon. I'm not too hip about politics. I'd like to make a couple of suggestions. I think you shot yourself in the foot a long time ago when you changed from a regional airport to a municipal airport. Manchester is now the Manchester-Boston Regional Airport. How come? Because they say they make more money getting more passengers and having more planes landing there. My other shot would be, don't sell anything, rent it or lease it.
Good thoughts. Now so kind of give us some feedback. We talk about the potential of looking at developing an asset. Some questions about whether we can develop the asset that we have. Maybe we have to define the asset more, make sure we're clear on it, and we look at perhaps developing it. And then there's discussion here about governance structure, as to whether governance structure should change. One of the critical pieces that I've seen structures come and go, but if it's not producing the outcomes that people want it to produce, and it's not affordable, then the structure change just doesn't change the equation. So we've got to remember that we have to be able to actually define and state an outcome and say that's what we're willing for it to do, and then we have to be able to make sure it's affordable. Yes, sir.
I feel that a clear outcome that is ringing through the hall here is to have people pay for the services rendered in proportion to how they benefit. But no one here has an idea as to how to measure that or achieve it. But that's not something it's impossible to do. I feel that it would be appropriate to do a study of some sort that would basically take every element of the airport and figure out the footprint and the degree of benefit throughout the Upper Valley region. Once you know that, then you can make the case either by pleading for income through taxation or simply making fees that reflect the level of usage that are within the tolerance of the people to receiving the services to pay. You would be in a much better position as far as income is concerned. There's also the expense side, and that is you would benefit, I feel, by doing a cost comparison study of similar airports throughout the Northeast and seeing whether or not your costs are in proportion to those out there, and figure out what magic they're doing if your costs are different from what they achieve.
Very good. Make sure I have your name and residency.
Oops. I'm that foreigner from Norwich, Steve Flanders.
All right, Mr. Flanders.
I'm wondering why these people from Lebanon announce themselves at the beginning and everybody else has to...
We'll get you a mic there, Steve.
No, I don't.
It's an interesting thing, I've been as a manager for 21 years, and then prior to that being a municipal attorney, that we had the issues of legal boundaries and then actual use of services and outcomes. And people will go where they have to go get what they have to get. And what we've got to do is we've got to figure out how to work that through and what kind of model can we have. Now, there was a suggestion there at the model of pay according to benefit, the equitably parity. If you benefit proportionally, you should pay proportionally to what you do. And then the question is, can you get tools if you don't have tools to allow it to occur? Because you can see in the debate within people that live in an area that may not use the service, but they're paying for the service, and then you can see people that are using the service that may not be paying for it in the way that the system works, and trying to find that magic tool that will work. Usually what you would do is, in socialist Minnesota, where I come from, we would go over and we create a special law, and we'd make it work by a special law. But that's not New Hampshire, so I've been informed by that, slapped around a little bit for that kind of talk. So I'm not going to talk about that anymore. But we have another gentleman right there. Sir.
My name is Bob Pringles, 3 Scott Avenue, West Lebanon. I work at the airport. I'm retired, but I can't stay home, so I go up there, and Rick keeps me busy. And I just want to give, that expenses are a great thing. I mean, it's a lot easier to make money by cutting expenses than it is to sell more product. And since I've worked at the airport quite a few years, this gentleman up here, Rick, it takes an act of God up there to spend $1. And I just, example, I had to order some supplies today for the bathroom. And it wasn't just making a phone call to White River Paper. It was go through the lady who runs the office and compare the prices, what we were paying, and when did we buy the last amount. And I just wanted to let people know that the airport runs on a very, very thin crew. I think we have 3 full-time people. That includes Rick, and the rest is part-time help. When it snows, got people coming in from all over the place to help. It isn't full-time people. I was out today on the airfield with our foreman who was climbing telephone poles, replacing obstruction lights. Everybody works at what they're doing, but we're not doing it with a bunch of people. It's done with a thin crew, and as I say, when $1 is spent, it has to be justified.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead. I think that the affordability and the leanness of our system is very clear in the city. That's a good sign. It's a good thing that we have this leanness, but we need to. You still have to produce outcomes. No matter how lean you are, the purpose of being lean, those who teach Sigma lean or any of that stuff, is that it's the outcome, the result, the end that matters. If you don't have an end, a result, or a product, or an outcome at the end of the day, and you have all the processes and you're lean as can be, and the public isn't getting the outcomes they wish, and that's not going to work for our community. I saw Mr. Wood floating around, or somebody over there.
Tom Corman, Ward 3. I used to fly out of Lebanon quite a bit back in the 90s because there were connections that I could make, especially in Philadelphia. So if I was flying to the West Coast, I could do that. I find it hard to believe that given the current level of employments that the airport would manage to be self-supporting going forward, although I am encouraged to see the increases over the years. But I think there's still a ceiling given that we can go to Boston, where if you're going through Terminal C, it's great, otherwise it's not so good, and then to New York where there are no connections at all. So I would encourage the airport to, or Cape Air, to try to get connections to somewhere toward the west, Philadelphia, or somewhere else where we could actually make good connections if we were going west. Another seems like easy thing is that we have this restaurant space up at the airport, which has been unused for a few years. There was a sports bar or something up there, and then there was the Tailwind Cafe before that. But it seems like that would be a very easy revenue source if we could actually get a restaurant in there. I know that there was almost a prospect of it happening recently, but it seems like this is something that we ought to be able to do and get a restaurant that would even be a destination restaurant for people in the local area.
That's good. That's good. Now, there is an RFP right now for that restaurant area. We have one proposer who's going, is expressing interest. We encourage proposals. We like to see competition. I come from places where you used to go out to the airport and have a nice dinner or have a nice meal and watch the planes. You took my kids out there. It's cheap entertainment, and we'd have a good meal and we'd go watch those planes because the kids are fascinated by the planes. So there are things at the sense of place we have at the airport there's been some other things mentioned about having it's such a natural preserve that maybe we should look at that as a part of our approach to it. So we do these various things because, like Rick has been paring down that additional money out of the real property tax system, but that's still a challenge, like that gentleman said. But with these other outcomes might be things that really work. We have 2 minutes left. Do we have any like top of the line things, Rick? You got? I think we have. Steve, you're back there.
Oh yeah, quickly. Stephen Wood, Lebanon. I honor the Rick and the people who are operating this airport leanly now. But there is a peculiar irony here, which is that historical irony, which is that back when Lebanon first wanted to expand its airport, it was sued by area towns because of the threat to their quality of life that expansion of the airport would perhaps cause. Now the shoe is on the other foot, and I just want to remind everybody that an airport is not like another public utility. There is a downside for the people who live in the place where the airport actually exists that goes beyond the fiscal. And I think we can manage this. I mean, gosh, when this lawsuit was being brought, I was the only resident of Lebanon who was down testifying in Boston in favor of the expansion of the airport. So the shoe's on the other foot for a lot of us here. We've got to be careful, we in Lebanon, that in the hope that we can produce financial stability at the airport, we don't give up something that we'll never get back. I mean, airports. Talk to people in Milton, Massachusetts. I know this is not Logan, but we need to be cautious here. We need to be cautious of general aviation. We need to be cautious of everything we do down there in the course of trying to do what I think we should be trying to do, which is to achieve the sort of financial stability that we've been talking about.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we're going to close. There's a lot of room for a lot of good discussion here. But I always commit that I start at 6:30, I end at 8:30, I always stop at 8:30. And it's the way my mother taught me. So I want to thank you from my heart that you came out here on the first day of spring in 70, 80 degree temperature when you should be out in your shorts and your short sleeves and enjoying and you're out here, and that is really caring. I want to thank every member of the resources. Please let this conversation continue. We're going to have a website component that you can put that on there. If you're in hard copy, I'm there. I have an open door policy at the City Hall. You can come and visit with me about your thoughts. We got the list, I believe, of people signing up. If you didn't get on the list, please get to Paula in the back room. Well, what the follow-up is, of course, we're going to have the website present. The second follow-up is Rick and I are right now working on the airport work plan. And so what we're trying to utilize, we're out there, the first department out of the chute, it's the airport, is to take your inputs, your conversations, and we're going to put it in the work plan. Now, the work plan will come back to the City Council in two forms. It'll come back at the Council's work session, which is going to be held in April 24th and 26th. All departments are going to present their work plans, and then it's going to come back in the 2013 budget. So we're going to take 2 bites out of this situation. The first one is April 24th and 26th. The next one is in November when we present the 2013 budget, which we're working on. And we'll share this work plan with you. It's going to be very transparent, so we're going to share the work plan back to you. Thank you, and have a great night. Enjoy the spring.